like it's been a while since we've done a book talk, so let's talk about assisting a villain. And by that I really mean assistant to the villain. Really, I picked it up because I was in a Barnes & Noble one day and it had the painted edges, and I'm a sucker for pretty books. So here we are. I have learned only since I picked up this book that it has like blown up on Booktalk and everybody is like super excited about this book, and I can see why. It's a very fun, enchanting story. At no point does it feel like the story takes itself too seriously. Like there are definitely some serious elements in some of those moments of like things are looking really dark and down. But I would say first and foremost, this is more comedy, edging into parody, but not strictly parody. It definitely has a lot of elements of fantasy without being too like heavy, high concept fantasy. It's like a level of fantasy that I enjoy as somebody who doesn't really get into fantasy, where like there's dragons and fairies and other like mythic creatures, but the depth of them is very almost like fairy tale level, where we're aware that they exist and there is some interaction with them, but we don't go too deeply into how they work, where they come from. And I feel like fairy tale is a great way to describe this book. Like there's a lot of surface level, just sort of skimming the surface of the story and skimming the surface of everything. So the general premise, it feels like it's kind of a formula, but we have Evie, who is in her early 20s. She is trying to find a job. She has just lost a job after her boss was not the nicest to her. There may have been some stabbing involved. There may have been some harassment involved. And she decides to take a long walk off a short pier into the haunted woods that is guarded and haunted kind of by a character literally called the villain. The prologue is all about how they meet and how she gets her job, and then the first chapter is after she's already been in the job for a little bit, and we get into sort of the meat of the story where there's just little bits of trouble all throughout. We realize that there is a mystery afoot as somebody has become a traitor and is releasing information and basically assisting the villain's nemesis, the king. And so the whole book is a combination of trying to figure out who is releasing information to the king, who is sabotaging the villain's plan, and also the villain being very heavily attracted to Evie, the main character, who is the assistant to the villain, while the assistant is also, feeling her feelings. It's a book that is really more about the adventure than it is about the plot. So if you're going into it thinking this is going to be like a serious story of adventure, it's not. Don't get me wrong, it is super fun. This is very playful. A lot of it is based more in the bantering between characters, and it's almost like each of the characters is well aware of their role in a story. They never directly come out and say that they are in a story necessarily, but like they're aware of their role and aware of what their role entails. And I think nowhere is it more apparent than in the fact that the villain literally calls himself and is known as the villain. There's no character called the hero, but we do have the villain, and through most of the book, the main character doesn't even know that the villain has a name that isn't the villain. Side note, I am judging hard the name that the author has chosen for the villain because it's giving frat boy vibes more than like fantastical villain vibes. So I'm judging that name very harshly, but I digress. If you're looking for a serious book, if you're looking for a book that like really has fantasy elements with a lot of world building, this is not for you. While this book does have some elements of a mystery, I feel like this book is also not really hitting the criteria for a serious mystery. I do feel like it was a really fun book. It was definitely edging more in that cozy realm. There were some elements that were definitely darker, especially when you're talking about like decapitated heads hanging from the rafters when she's going into work. But that's what you sign up for when you are assisting the villain, Like, the villain is really just a caricature of what we see from villains in other stories. The villain is evil for the sake of being evil, and he knows this about himself. It's giving the vibe of, like, those children villains that, like, Dr. Doofenshmirtz from Phineas and Ferb. It's like, I am evil because I am evil. And it's only every so often that we get a bit of the tragic backstory that kind of explains why he's evil. But he's definitely a character that at no point sees himself as the good guy. And then there's Evie, who seems like she should be more like with the hero type, not with the villain type. The very sunshine and rainbows sort of personality. Golden Retriever vibes, if you will. And it's one of those Golden Retriever vibe folks that they're so Golden Retrieverish because of all of the trauma that they've experienced. And given how this book ends, I'm really interested to see how that develops in the rest of the story. Which is to say that I would be interested in continuing reading the series. Let's dive a little bit deeper. So from the first few pages, I knew that I was going to have a lot of fun with this book just for the way that it's presented and the way that it's written. It definitely has a very distinct voice. There's some playfulness there, there's some sarcasm in there. There's always that tinge of being just on the edge of a breakdown in there. On page 3, there was a bit about sighing and splashing another bit of red water against her face. Stops mid-word, wait. Read, and I knew from that moment that I was like, we are interrupting our thoughts in a third-person narrative. I'm here for this. The author did a really good job at weaving in some foreshadowing for some elements, particularly as it relates to the romance side of the story. So from the very beginning, there are just little threads of things that we catch on to at the very beginning that we're not really sure, like, it's relevant, but is it relevant to the romance? And we find out towards the end that yes, this has a lot more meaning than we were presented with at the beginning. Like, this is obviously a romance story, but like the depth of the feelings for each other and when those started, that is weaved in really, really well. What isn't weaved in very well is the mystery components, which is really disappointing because I can tell that the author has the ability. They're just not using it for the mystery. And before I go much deeper, I will say that this is one of those books that you really got to be in it for the adventure of it, not for the story of it, because the story is in and of itself extremely simplistic. It is very formulaic. The thing that makes this book so fun is the presentation. It is the adventure of going through the story with these particular characters in this setting. So from this point on in the video, there may be some plot spoilers, but just know that you're not really here for the plot, you're here for the adventure. But also, if you haven't read this book yet, this may be a good time to drop off the video, go read it, and then come back. Okay, so I found a lot of frustration with the mystery because there were so many points at which we're given a hint and then we find that that's a dead end. Like that was a red herring of some sort. And then we get another hint and then that's also a red herring. And this cycle just repeats over and over and over. And along the way, none of the hints that were given that turn out to be leading in the wrong direction ever have any linkage back to what the actual resolution of the mystery is. It's kind of frustrating because we get in this pattern and this habit of hint, that was wrong, hint, that was wrong, hint. This one was correct. I feel like there were a lot of points that we could have gotten maybe a little bit more. There's little breadcrumbs that would lead us back to the beginning of the story and you'd be like, wait, that does make sense. Because that really wasn't there. And I think the other thing that frustrated me was that the main character, was specifically hiding from the audience that they knew what was happening until the grand reveal. It kind of made me think of Argylle, which had something very similar. I never read the book, but like the movie Argylle, it had that very similar thing of like, this is what's happening. No, actually, this is what's happening. No, actually, this is... That's exactly what was happening here. It's like, actually, this is the character that you need to watch. Actually, this is the character you need. Actually, no, it's this. No, it's this one over here. That was one of the areas that I felt like the story was almost dumbed down. Like, it wouldn't have been that hard to throw those hints in all throughout, you know? I feel like the grand reveal still could have been really dramatic, and it could have been a really good aha moment for both the reader and the characters if the reader had been able to have that aha moment. Instead, it was just a dramatic, it was them all along. Oh. Play more for the dramatics and sort of that soap opera-ish way rather than a proper mystery way. And I feel like that was one of the areas that this book could have been a lot better. Like, you can still have that cozy while still kind of having that level of craft. On the note of craft, I feel like the timing of things worked really well. The flow of the book was really nicely paced. At no point did I feel like we were dragging or just trying to fill pages. It moved pretty smoothly, I think. I would say that the main complaint that I have as far as the pacing and the flow is that we get the introduction and then we just skip ahead several months. It's one of those situations where it makes me understand the people that hate like prologues, because the prologue here was honestly kind of unnecessary unless we were going to get that time span of those 5 months between the prologue and chapter 1. And really, I feel like there could be a short story collection here touch into those 5 months, because clearly stuff happened. Clearly it was exciting. I feel like there could be a lot of fun had in this world with short stories that sort of supplement the main novels. They don't necessarily have to play into the romance element of it. There's a lot of other fun little things that are happening. I think one of my favorite things that showed me how much the villain liked Evie, or even potentially loved Evie, beyond the overt, obvious, movements, beyond his inner turmoil at having human emotions, was after Evie told him that she thought his real name would be something like Fluffy. He was like, you know what? That is what we're gonna name that dragon. We're gonna name the dragon Fluffy. And that was just such an awe moment. Also, the fact that we get this connection linking from when she noticed the guy that was torturing ducks to when he remembered the time that he tortured the guy that was torturing ducks. Torture and murder. It's the best way to show a woman you care. I understand that this book is part of a series and that there is still more world building to do and that there are more elements to explore. And so we don't want to answer every single question posed in this book, but I feel like there were so many threads that were left just hanging that it felt excessive, and it was very frustrating to reach the end and have no answers. Throughout the entire book, we are under the assumption that Evie's mother is gone, potentially dead. We don't know what happened to her. And then she finds this letter, and that implies that the mother is still around somewhere. Where is the mother? What is the mother doing? But it also makes me think and question, is her brother actually dead? Or is he just somewhere in the ether? I don't know, hiding somewhere. Maybe he is with the mother. Is the brother going to make a dramatic appearance? I will also say the family connections throughout the book was really interesting to me. Everything relates to these two families, between the villain's family and Evie's family. And about halfway through, I really genuinely thought that the villain's father was going to be the king. For how much the family relationships were played out, particularly with the villain's family, I really thought this was going to turn around and be a parental abuse situation or something of that sort, and that was why the villain was the villain and why the villain was against the king. And that does lead to one other kind of shortfall that I felt with this book. We don't understand what the villain's vendetta is against the king until the last 10 to 20 pages. I understand a lot of that has to do with the vulnerability of the situation and the relationship between him and Evie, but it also means that we're just sort of following this caricature of a villain through this entire story, not understanding why. Why is he the villain here? What is his tragic backstory? I also love that this has just so many romantic comedy tropes. It does have a meet cute, which is the whole prologue that felt entirely unnecessary, but we do have that falling out. We do have the grand gestures. We do have the complete confusion about feelings and the conflict of, do I tell her? Do I not tell her? Do I tell him? Do I not tell him? What am I actually feeling? Are these feelings actually appropriate? I don't want to be rejected. The whole misinterpreting what the other person is doing and saying no, this is clearly why they're doing this thing. It's not because they share the same attraction I do. It's because they have a reason. At the very end, I was also confused about what was happening to all of the characters. So we know that Arthur has been taken by the king. We know that Tristan, the villain, has been taken by the king. We know where Tristan's sister is. Where is Malcolm? But what has happened to Malcolm? I'm also really interested in knowing, because the king has come to this place, did the traitor make an escape? Was the traitor taken back? Or is the traitor still in the manor? All in all, very cozy read. If you don't spend too much time thinking about it. It's super, super fun. If you try to take this book too seriously, you will get frustrated and potentially upset, which is what I'm doing through this book talk. Because the more I think about it, the more I'm getting a little upset about it. But in the moment, it's super fun. This is definitely not everybody's cup of tea. The humor is definitely giving young adult. The book is technically marketed as an adult. It feels young adult to me. I think some of the language is perhaps a bit stronger than what you would see in a typical young adult novel. If you're looking for smut, this is not it. It's giving kind of PG-13 but with extra language. It's more Deadpool than 50 Shades of Grey, I guess, if that makes sense. The humor is definitely not for everyone. It's definitely not like highbrow humor. It is very much the sarcastic banter of young adult. I would technically think that this should be classified more in the new adult genre, kind of sitting in between YA and adult, but it is what it is. So yeah, have you read Assistant to the Villain yet? If you have, let me know what your thoughts were in the comments down below. What did you love about it? What did you hate about it? What did you maybe feel indifferent about that other people seem to have very strong feelings about? Let me know in the comments down below. And while you're down there, be sure to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, all the other YouTuber stuff. I don't know. I'm gonna go. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I will see you next time. Bye!